Well, surprise, surprise. Father Mitch is preaching again. The uniqueness of today really struck me, I think it was on Friday, that, and especially the gospel message, and part of that selecting Matthew's because tomorrow is actually the day of Epiphany. However, because of the weather, we're canceling tomorrow's Eucharistic service. Nothing's happening right now, but according to the closest proximity of projections, we're looking from 8 to 12 inches between now and tomorrow night. So, pretty good chance, I think, that we would not be here at 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. But in selecting the passage of Matthew chapter 2 and the Epiphany passage, it reminded me that, sorry, this is going to really age me, but 49 years ago in 1 month, I did my first sermon. I was not a professing Christian, but because I was the president of my local MYF, Methodist Youth Fellowship, before I became United Methodist, they asked me to do a sermonette, for our youth of the district. And I thought I'd do the comparison between the Gospel of Luke Christmas story and the Matthew Christmas story. Well, I was done in less than 5 minutes. I didn't read any of the passages. I said, Luke said this and Matthew said that, and this is where they differ, and realized it was done. I've already spoke more now than what I did then. Sorry, it's not going to be that short today. But anyway, in that regards, I thought it was very interesting, God, that you were bringing these things back to mind, that the message of the gospel is so strong. And yet so many times we'd overlook it because it becomes familiar and easy just to skip over stuff. We hear, and those of us who grew up in small churches that always had the Christmas pageant of having all the little kids come up, somebody being Mary and somebody carrying in their baby doll, and we had shepherds, wrapped in bathrobes. We had our kings in bathrobes with aluminum foil crowns and proclaimed as being the kings who were coming. And so you get kind of wrapped up in those things and the story of it. But then when you go back and really start reading the scripture, you realize, wait a minute. The Magi, I had to go back and read and understand this pronunciation of being Magi instead of Magi. But who cares, really? But it's one of those things, all of a sudden you realize you take these things for granted. But anyway, you start looking at these stories and the difference, and you realize, man, there's a span of time something had to take place. You had the birth of Christ. We have the story of the shepherds who come because of the angel saying, hey, guess what's happening in Bethlehem? Go and see. And they do. And they find him in the manger, in the dark cave. Remember the icon last week of the darkness of the cave, how the light came into that. Well, then somewhere along the line, these wise men come. These the magi. Well, you start looking at the difference in the stories, and you begin to see, okay, there's a time frame. There's a span of time that took place, because Matthew points out the fact that the magi came to see Mary and the baby Jesus in a house, not in the stable. Okay, God, you're tearing the story of Christmas apart. But we have to start looking at these things and say, okay, why and what was the purpose? Remember the shepherds who came. They were dirty. They basically were unclean because of their jobs. They were unclean in the Jewish eyes, but yet they were Jews. And so they came and worshiped and saw and they went back and told what they had seen and what the angels had told them. So now we come to Matthew chapter 2, and we get these magi that come, and Matthew has a particular way of kind of being upfront with the Jewish people. If you ever read the introduction to the book of Matthew, you find out that not only was Matthew a Jew, but he was writing primarily to the Jewish people. That is why the genealogy in Matthew 1 talks about starting the genealogy of Abraham. A purpose to that. It says, hey, I am writing to you Jews. He's really upfront with them. Because he starts going through the lineage of Jesus. I'm going to tie all this together. Just kind of follow along, okay? But in going through that genealogy, he really challenges the Jewish people because of all things, he brings up 3 women. How in the world? Matthew, what are you doing? And if you look at them, they all have a unique story, those women do, that goes contrary to the Jewish mindset of saying we have to have this perfect lineage toward our Messiah. And remember, Matthew was a tax collector. When he was selected, it says that even Jesus came to eat with him after he called him and said, and he ate with the tax collectors and sinners. So here's one of the reasons why Matthew, I think, is putting in this genealogy with these 4 women in it. These 4 women that have stories behind their names. Tamar, the daughter-in-law of Judah. If you go back, it's a fascinating story if you've not gone back and read that for a while. Tamar, being the daughter-in-law, was promised a son of Judah. But Judah denied her. So what'd she do? She basically set herself up as a prostitute and then became pregnant from Judah. And when it came time to, when people realized this lady's pregnant, they come to Judah and said, Judah, your daughter-in-law is pregnant. Judah says, bring her out and burn her. Tamar says, hey, I've got these things that were given to me by the man that I had relations with. And Judah realized they were his and said, Tamar is more righteous than I am. So here's our first quote-unquote scandal in the lineage that Matthew is portraying. The next one, Rahab the harlot from Jericho. Again, she was a non-Jew. Matthew has a plan in all this as he's telling these stories. The next one that he brings up is Ruth, a Moabite, grandmother of David. Okay, here's somebody else who's non-Jew. And who's the 4th one? It's fascinating because Matthew does not even give her name. He says, Uriah's wife. Everybody knew who that was, Bathsheba. So what is Matthew doing? He is setting up the gospel message to the Jews and says, you're not elite as you think you are. Because when you go back and you not only look at the lineage of Abraham, but if you look at the promise of Abraham, God says that he will bless all people under him. And this becomes part of Matthew's message. And that's why these magi who come from the east, unclean, but they come to Jerusalem looking for the one who is born King of the Jews. They did not say the one who is to become the King of the Jews. They were making a fact. Where is the one who is born King of the Jews? By the way, if you want to jump forward into the Gospels, What did Pilate write on the top of the cross? The King of the Jews. So here it is, Matthew still proclaiming to his Jewish audience that, hey, wake up and smell the roses. This is the Messiah who has come. And so as these magi come, and they begin to inquire in Jerusalem of Herod, hey, where is this person who's born King of the Jews? If you read the story and the history of Herod, he is a very paranoid king. What is interesting, he's so wise. I mean, he's the one who rebuilt the temple. He built aqueducts. He built special pools. He did all sorts of wonderful, miraculous, for that particular time and era of an architect, such a brain. But he was paranoid. So paranoid, he had his wife and his son killed because he thought they were threatening him. So consequently, when these wise men come and say, where is this person born King of the Jews? He is upset. And not only that, all the people, it says in Jerusalem, were upset as well. Not so much the point that the one who's being born, but what in the world's Herod going to do? He had already scared them to death with all these other things he had done. But here these wise men come seeking. I think it's also interesting because it talks about they saw the star that was in the east. You missed a good message Friday at the Eucharist because Father Tenney talked about the light and how we need to look and be reminded of the light of Christ who's come into the world. And so these stargazers, these magi who were seekers, by the way, they were not kings. In fact, they were not called kings until around 225 BC. Magi, people who, if you read in the Old Testament, these are the people you're supposed to stay away from. Have nothing to deal with fortune tellers, astrologers. Again, Matthew trying to say, hey guys, wake up. If these people can know who the Messiah is, surely you should be able to recognize it as well. Anyway, that's one of those little side parts where these were not really kings. And that's why the icon on the front of your bulletin is a very simplistic one, but they do not have crowns. And that's why it was chosen, because we need to remember that these men who were seekers, they may have been part of the royal court, but they were not royalty. You and I are not royalty. But we truly seek after the Son of God, as they were looking for this king who's to be born. So anyway, Herod says, he asked all his religious people around him, says, okay, where is this guy supposed to be born? Where is this son that's supposed to be born? And so we read in the passages where they tell him, says, hey, it's over in Bethlehem, 5 miles away. Not bad. And he also I think what is interesting, he asked the wise men, the magi secretly, hey, when you find him, come back and tell me. I want to come and worship him as well. By the way, the word worship there is basically the Greek word that means to prostrate yourself. Basically give homage. It's not so much the idea that you worship him the way we worship Christ now, but the idea of giving honor. And so he says, I want I want to also give homage or worship this person. So the wise men take off. And I think what is fascinating is that all of a sudden the star appears again. It had been somewhere, it disappeared. But as soon as they left Herod, they saw it, and it says they rejoiced with a great joy because they saw the star. They saw the sign in heaven. They saw the light that they needed to see to guide them to the place where Jesus was laid, to the house where they found Mary and the baby. And so we continue as they come and give that honor to Christ. again, part of Matthew's story of saying, this is the gospel that Jesus Christ came into the world for all mankind. Give him honor. He is our Messiah. He is the Messiah. And because of Matthew, who he was, I think does so much for us as well, because when we look at ourselves, who were we before we had the epiphany of who Christ was and who Christ is? We too are sinners. We too were outcast and set aside. And Matthew is trying to tell each one of us, Christ came for each of you. Christ came for me. Even as a 15-year-old giving my first sermon who had no idea of the work and the fullness of salvation of Christ. Somewhere along the line there was a light that got started. It started stirring something to come to the realization that I am a sinner, that I am the same as a tax collector. But Christ came for me. Christ came for you. I need to give him homage. But then I need to project. I need to change not just the homage, but then it becomes a worship. For this is my Lord and my God, who came down, became flesh, dwelt among us, who lived and who gave his life for me, a sinner. But by his grace and his mercy he came for all of mankind. And so I pray as we reflect on this 11th day of Christmas, tomorrow being the last one, that we really reflect upon the idea of Christ coming for each one of us. And not only for just one of us, everyone else who's outside these doors. And as a church, we need to make sure that that light shines to the rest of the world. Let them come as the Magi came. Pray for God to put the seeking heart within people, to seek after Christ, to seek after the promised one, to seek after the King, and to come and worship him.